All right, guys, so what we're focusing on today, which is really the foundation of this entire class, is geography and the 5 themes of geography. Now, they're going to be popping up in every single one of our units, but we're just going to get them started today. There are 5, as the name suggests. We're only going to focus on the first one, though, which is location. We'll talk about the other 4 tomorrow, but location's a big one, so we're going to focus on that primarily. But to start us off, to really get into it, this is cultural studies, but it really is also a geography class. Let's talk about what the word geography means. Geographia means to describe the earth. Okay, so the space on earth, the interactions that take place there, the physical features, so the mountains, the rivers, things like that, and of course the human features, which is more the cultural aspect of it. Okay, now when we talk about interacting with the earth, obviously we interact with it all the time. We walk on it, we run on it, we swim in it. Okay, we are constantly interacting with the earth. We have it, of course, for our entire existence. We have to have interaction with the earth. But we find that people in different places interact with the earth in different ways. Okay, so for example, here in Illinois, okay, we live in a place that's kind of at sea level. It's pretty flat. So our interactions with the earth are going to look really different than people who live out in California. Okay, they have a much more temperate climate year round. So they can even have more open structures to their high school. They can have open hallways. When it's 20 below in the winter, having a high school with open hallways isn't really the best idea. Okay, but people on the California coast, they can probably surf because they have the ocean right there. Surfing in Illinois is going to be a little bit trickier to do. So our interactions are going to be different based on what physical geography we have to work with. Our interactions are different for so many of these different factors because of our climate, because of our landscape, because of our culture. All that can influence how we interact with the earth. But we do find that we're going to have similar interactions because we're part of the same country. We might have a lot of the same cultural influences and still have basic necessities as humans in terms of interacting with our surroundings. Okay, let's talk about some of the tools of the trade. We'll go into more depth about these. We're going to actually use one of these tools today. But in terms of geography, we're going to be using something called mental maps. Now, mental maps are, as the name suggests, maps that are in your head. And you have a ton of these mental maps that are all filed away. You don't even think about it. So an example of a mental map would be how you get from your bedroom to the bathroom. Okay, do you actually pull out a map to get directions to your bathroom, or could you basically do it with your eyes closed because you're so familiar with the layout of your house? That's an example of a mental map. When you guys come back into the building, you're going to create a new mental map, which is going to be your schedule of classes, knowing which stairwells to take to get from block 1 to block 2, knowing where the best drinking fountain is, where your locker is. You're going to be creating those new mental maps. Okay, we also use an atlas, which is a book of maps. So I have atlases here in the classroom. Maybe if your parents are old school for road tripping, they might have an atlas in their car. But we don't use atlases a lot anymore since we have so many maps at our fingertips technologically. So Google Earth, which is what we're going to play around with today, is going to be one of those databases that has all of those maps and all sorts of information we can interact with. Now, MapQuest isn't used as often. I know Google Maps or Apple Maps is used. Some of the old school tools using models or graphs, so seeing a physical model of the Earth's surface. Sometimes if you go to museums, you can see them, but they're not really used that often anymore. But the globe technically would be considered a model. But a lot of what we use today is something through either called ground truthing or remote sensing, that we use satellites, or we use those Google Earth cars. Have you ever seen it? That has a camera on the top that takes pictures. We use photographs to compile all of that data together to make our maps. And of course, satellites. All right, so sorry for the poor quality of the image here, but these are the 5 themes of geography: location, place, region, movement, human environment, interaction. We'll talk about place, region, movement, human environment, interaction tomorrow, but today we're going to focus on just the theme of location. Now, these 5 themes were developed by the National Geographic Society. You might have heard of them before. They have their own channel where they create a lot of really cool programming, and they also have magazines where they look at different parts of the world and kind of bring that to our homes. All right, but let's talk first about location. Now, there's 2 kinds of location: relative and absolute. Okay, relative is how a place is related to its surrounding environment. So, for example, saying Chicago is on or next to Lake Michigan if somebody has never heard of Chicago or knows where it is, but they've heard of Lake Michigan, they could probably piece together some attributes about Chicago. Like, oh, if it's on a Great Lake, you could probably go boating, you could go swimming. It's a freshwater body of water, so that's maybe where a lot of people get their drinking water from. So relative location is what we use most often. So let's say you meet a new friend and they're like, oh, where do you live? And you say, oh, I live over by HC Storm. That helps to give someone some context to narrow in where you live. Like, oh, I know where HC Storm is. I know where your home is. So I have a connection to that. Okay, so we use relative location more often, especially for giving people directions or giving them an idea where something is. But we're going to talk today about absolute location and how we find it. Now, no matter where we are on Earth, we have an exact location, exact place that something is found. And that's determined by an imaginary grid. So since our Earth is round, we can apply sort of these geometric principles. So there's a series of lines. If you ever looked at a map, you see these light blue lines usually that are on the map. That's the grid that we're talking about. We're going to break it down so we understand which grid, which line means what. Okay, but first we got to make sure we know our compass. Okay, knowing our directions is the key to understanding latitude and longitude. Okay, so I put a picture of it there. One way we can to remember it is going clockwise. Never eat soggy waffles. I've also heard never enter Santa's workshop. Okay, but really we need to know that north and south are up and down, east and west are left and right. Okay, so knowing our compass, having that in mind is going to be really helpful for our next step. Now, as we're breaking down the Earth and trying to understand absolute location, first, we got to start with the basics. So I know a lot of this is probably review, but still I got to make sure we know it. All right, so the equator is going to be the widest part of Earth. Okay, everything above the equator is considered the northern hemisphere, and everything below the equator is the southern hemisphere. And hemisphere means half, two halves. Okay, so when we divide it into these two halves, it kind of breaks it up into these chunks that we can help find the absolute location for. So as you can see, in the United States, we are in the northern hemisphere. Okay, if I lived in Australia, I would be in the southern hemisphere. Okay, so remember our compass. Everything above the equator is going to be north. Everything below the equator is going to be south. Now, there's another line that helps tell us east from west, and that's called the prime meridian. Now, the prime meridian is going to go up and down, and it divides east from west. And it's also called the Greenwich meridian. Now, I know it looks like Greenwich, but they're British, and they have to make it complicated. It's pronounced Greenwich. Okay, and it goes through Greenwich, England, which is basically London, and you can see it cuts down through Europe and through the western part of Africa. Now, everything over here on this side of the prime meridian is west. Everything on this side of the prime meridian is east. Okay, so we live in the northern hemisphere. We're north of the equator, but then we're also west of the prime meridian. Okay, down here in Australia, I am south of the equator, and I'm east of the prime meridian. Now, since our Earth is round, we divide it by degrees, okay? 0 to 180 degrees. So the prime meridian is considered 0. On the other side of the Earth, it's called the international date line, that's 180 degrees, okay? Now, it comes to the equator is always 0 degrees, okay? So it tells us how far we are away from the equator as we go. So let's add another layer to this, latitude. Okay, all the lines that run parallel to the equator are called latitude lines. To remember the difference, lat is flat. Okay, so if it's flat like this, lat is flat, and parallel to the equator, it's a latitude line. And it tells us how far or how close we are to the equator. Okay, so if you look on here, you can see that there's a 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 degree line. Okay, but then there's also a 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 degree line down here. How do we tell the difference? Well, we add a little notation to it. Okay, since up here we're above the equator, we're north. So this little guy right here, this line would be 30 degrees north. Okay, now down here, this line, we're below the equator, so we're south. So this would be 30 degrees south. So we just add a little S, 30 degrees, and then we add a little S after it. Okay, that helps to tell us how far we are. So if I'm at this 30 degree and that 30 degree, I'm the exact same distance from the equator, just going in different directions. I'm 30 degrees north or 30 degrees south. Okay, so that's the first thing we have to find. We always find the latitude first, and then we're going to find the longitude second. Okay, so we always find how far we are from the equator first, and then next we're going to find how far we are from the prime meridian. All right, so longitude, we're applying the same concept, just in a different direction. So at 0 degrees, that's going to be my prime meridian. Okay, anything to the west of it is west of the prime meridian. Anything to the east is east of the prime meridian. Okay, it's the same thing. I got another 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, and then I have another 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60. So this 30 degrees over here, since I'm west of the prime meridian, I would write 30 degrees west. Over here, since I'm 30 degrees east of the prime meridian, I would put 30 degrees east. And that's our longitude, all right? So lat is flat, longitude is long, all right? We always find our latitude first, our longitude second. Now, with these two things combined, we can find the exact location of anything on Earth. And we're going to play around with that when we get to Google Earth to check it out. All right, so this is our Earth. Okay, when we see the 20 degrees here and we see a 20 degrees there and we narrow it down. Okay, so right here I can see that I'm above the equator. So this would be 20 degrees north. Okay, and then if I go over here, I see this 20 degrees. I am west of the prime meridian. So I'd be 20 degrees north, 20 degrees west. Okay, so we're going to get some more practice with that with our Google Earth activity.